So, who has a question? I'll stand now.
I have a
Yes.
question about sows in general, I suspect, not so much guinea hogs, but you mentioned that the sow, a nursing sow, would shut the milk bar off. What is that? What is that function?
That's a
She just
great
stands up and
question.
walks off,
Well, that's a great question. Thank you for asking. So, pigs are pigs, and they will eat till they burst. So, mama helps to regulate that by turning the milk bar on and turning the milk bar off. So, at a good sow will nurse the babies every 30 minutes. Others might have longer breaks in between, but the sow knows when her milk's ready to let down, and when she does that, she will lay down, she'll turn to her side, and she'll grunt, a certain grunt, and the piglets know to go grab a teat. Because after about 5 minutes, she stops grunting, and then she does a real fast grunt. And fast grunt is like flashing the lights before the show starts, you know? It's like, okay, get it quick. And they're slurping it up and they got white milk all over their face. And then she rolls over and puts her belly to the ground and says, that's it. Now, the piglets get pretty smart. By about 2 or 3 weeks, they'll know when she's eating that she can't turn the milk bar off because she's standing up. So they'll go get underneath her and try to get a little extra. But the milk's not really coming down really good at that point. So, good question. Next.
Yeah, my grandfather on my mother's side my mother was the only child on a Wisconsin dairy farm, and they had the white banded
Belted Galloways.
Okay, I guess I didn't know the name. And they had a unfortunate behavior of occasionally laying on it. But, as you mentioned, the guinea hog, somehow, either the piglets are smart enough to stay out of harm's way, and it might be the wiring and that they have a programming, or the mother doesn't, keeps track of her pigs. But he would lose a few pigs each breeding season to rollovers, and it was always sad. And I was shipped out to the farm for as long as my parents could have me out there, and there was always a dead pig being piglet. And they were so skittish, I couldn't play with them.
Well, the first 24 hours, mom's kind of in a daze because she's got all these hormones going on and she's tired, and the babies are just born, and their instinct is to go grab a teat. So it's real easy for a mama pig.
No, they're good sized pigs that were laid on piglets. I'm sorry to say.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear about it. The heritage, genetics, and innate behavior was what I was searching for. Is better wired. Maybe this white belted animal is more bred for and lost some of that. I don't know.
Interesting.
So it's going to happen. I mean, but not with the. Are you saying
it does happen with guinea hogs? But they do have those good instincts and their good mothering abilities, and they're a lot less likely to abandon a litter or that type of thing.
I remember my friend used to work on a farm, and they bred the pigs, and he told me all the time they were having to haul them out because the mom would, the sows would lay on the pigs, and they always had to haul them out, and it was so sad. He would name them and get real attached to them, and it was just real sad.
Oh,
so,
yeah, that's rough.
Broke his heart, and he'd get real attached to them. But I didn't know if that was something that just happened, and I guess it just happens naturally.
Yeah.
It's or if it was just because they were enclosed.
Let's sit down. There's plenty of room. Yeah, it's the nice thing about the heritage breeds is they retain a lot more of the instinct. When I was giving my list of characteristics, you may have heard ability to procreate naturally and wondered what that was about. If you think about the white broad-breasted turkeys that we eat, none of those are bred naturally. They're all artificially inseminated because that broad breast actually prevents the male from doing his job. And you've done that in order to give more meat on the table rather than to actually help the breed to survive. And so those are things that have changed over time in order to put more meat on the table rather than to protect an animal. My granddaughter Charlotte is here, and she's the one that made my beautiful bookmark. She's quite an artist. She's very creative. So, yes.
So, when you were raising them, were you raising them to, and also like contributing to the breeding effort?
Yes.
And then also, like, who did you pass yours on to when you closed down?
Yes. Okay, so we, for all the heritage breeds that I raised, breeding stock was one of my priorities. So I wanted to reproduce the animals and only select the best mamas, the ones that were vigorous and grew fast and had good temperaments, and move those forward for breeding stock. But then most of them had to be eaten. So those would go to 5 and 10, or to my CSA customers, or to the family for dinner. So so that's how you keep the breed moving forward and only move the best ones forward.
You were collecting data.
Yes.
Not just, it wasn't just like, oh, I really like this.
Well, you
one.
saw my yarn, you knitted some stuff from my yarn. So in order, that was, again, it was a landrace breed. There was a lot of variety in the fiber that those animals grew, but it was those best genetics that I tried to move forward. So a year ago in March is when I started moving my animals out, and I had a lot of repeat customers, and I had a lot of really good people that were buying my pigs. And so there was a lady that came all the way from Maine to buy livestock from me, and she'd come twice to buy animals. And then she ended up moving to North Carolina. So it was actually in the middle of that move. She was still commuting from Maine to North Carolina and moving her horses and her hogs there. And she came and got my best livestock. So I've got like 4 really good pigs in North Carolina. And then I wanted to make sure that somebody in Athens had my pigs so that I could still buy guinea hog meat. And so I could take Charlotte to go see the pigs at Aura's house, right, Charlotte? And so Aura got one of my favorite duos, so I can go see them and help her out. And then Chad here, who lives in Tignall in Wilkes County, he bought pigs from her. So so it's they're going out there, they're going hence and multiplying, and it keeps moving forward. Gary.
Yeah, did you notice like fairly quickly these genetics improving for each breed?
Yeah, and I don't like to say the genetics improving because, they are good genetics, but yeah, there's always some that are better than others. And so by selecting those that I thought were better than others, I would see more of what I was selecting for. So it's just like in plants, you'll have one plant in the row that is getting all eaten by bugs. I usually leave those in the row and let all the bugs go there, because if you pull that one out, then they start going for the next. Isn't that the way it goes? But you know that the rest of them have the better genetics, and if you're saving the seeds, then you wanted to save it from the healthy plants. Does that answer your question?
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And you had one sow that you sent down to Charleston.
Oh, yes. So one of the people that I interviewed for the book, Gray Moore, it was in South Carolina, and he was one of the early guinea hog breeders. He has Carolina Heritage Farm. If you eat heritage pork or pastured pork at a restaurant in South Carolina. It probably came from his farm. But he started out with guinea hogs, and so he had a deal with Middleton Plantation, which is in Charleston, where he would take them a pregnant sow every spring, and then they would have piglets on the plantation, and then in the fall he'd come bring mama back home and breed her again. So it was kind of a deal he had. But then he got out of breeding guinea hogs, and I checked with him to see if he knew anybody that would want a bred sow, because I had bred the sow and then I decided to sell the farm. She was going to have babies in March, and I needed a place for her to go, or she had babies in April and I needed her to go somewhere in March. And so he said, well, I owe a bred sow to the plantation. So he came down from South Carolina, picked up Billie Holiday and transported her to Charleston. And then I had a previous customer that happened to live 30 minutes from the plantation. I said, okay, here's the deal. I'll sell the 2 best girls out of this litter. We'll castrate the boys, and then you can have the castrated boys, the girls that aren't breeding stock, and the mama once the babies are weaned. And then he bred her again and took her back this year, and she had babies again in April. So he's continuing that tradition. Yeah, so I just love paying things forward and networking and working with people. Yeah, Kurt.
Yeah, you've eaten many breeds,
Mhm.
and can you reflect on comparing? And the Berkshire might be a better tasting pig, but what are the reasons? Can you compare how they eat?
Yeah, the Berkshire used to be more of a lard type hog. If you ever look at pictures of Berkshire in England like 200 years ago, they were a big, heavy producing hog. And if you look at a big Berkshire today, it's more of a lean meat hog. And so the guinea hog is one of about 3 lard hogs that's still available. I think the Ossabaw might be one, and the Mangalista. But so you've got a lot more fat in that hog, and it's a healthy fat. It's more like olive oil. It's monosaturated. It's not a saturated fat like you'd get in a beef profile. And also that fat just melts in your mouth. It's more of a buttery, melt in your mouth texture. It's not a firm, chewy, I just want to cut this off or spit it out kind of gristle. So it is very unique. A lot of chefs have really noticed the differences. And when you start buying directly from local farmers, you're not just looking for grass-fed beef. Then, like John and I like to eat piney wood beef, and then we like our piney wood beef from a certain farmer, So once you start cultivating the flavors of certain varieties, it's hard to go back. Mm-hmm.
Many hogs won't grow unless you feed a lot of corn and grains, and so what's the propensity of a guinea to field forage?
Kurt, you have so many good questions. This is like you're setting me up or something. Okay, so one thing about the guinea hog, if you notice the word I described it, thrifty. Thrifty is how you describe an animal that grows readily and fast. So they're born about the size of a Coke can, but then they grow real fast, but they're not a fast-growing breed. But they do get big on a very small amount of food. So we had some feeder pigs before we decided to breed pigs. I was worried about having a breeding boar and sow on the farm because they're usually 800 pounds, and I didn't want an 800-pound animal. The guinea hogs are more like 250 to 300 pounds. And so for these fast-growing pigs, I was feeding a 5-gallon bucket per pig every day. And for a lot of people, they'll just put out an all-you-can-eat on demand. They'll put out 300 pounds of food, and just the animals will just eat all day long. They're eating or sleeping. The guinea hog is eating grass, it's foraging for acorns, and they would eat 2 quarts a day. So instead of eating, gallons a day, they would eat just 2 quarts a day, and that would keep them going.
And you controlled it.
And I controlled it.
Okay.
Now, with the mamas lactating, then you triple that amount because they're feeding 8 or 9, or more. Yeah, Gary.
Yeah, with that lower volume, is that what really makes it like a better for a homestead?
Yeah, it's very inexpensive, and if you don't have a lot of freezer room, you process a pig and you get 50 pounds of meat instead of 150 pounds of meat. You've got more room for it, and if you want to do your butchering at home, it's not as much to deal with. So there are a lot of advantages for the restaurants. They like being able to cure the ham. Yeah, you have a question?
Maybe you make the point that even if the pig could self-sustain itself, like running in the woods, it's a good idea to feed it anyway because you always want it to come when you need it.
Right, yes. Well, for best nutrition, and especially for producing breeding stock, you always want to give your animals the best nutrition you can, even if they're foraging, but yeah, by feeding them every day, besides providing the best nutrition for them, because everybody doesn't have a perfect pasture, with all those vitamins and minerals they need, then you can train them. And I mean, I trained pigs to sit when they were 2 months old, and they knew their names, and they would follow me from one pasture to the next. I could just open a gate and say, "Hey, we're moving, let's go," and they would follow me. And so for all the animals, having a little bit of grain is always good. But corn is actually really bad for guinea hogs, since they will just bloat up on corn. And so you want to give them as little corn as possible.
What did you feed them?
So we fed them a pig ration, a 14% pig ration, and then I usually added black gold sunflower seeds and kelp and crab shells and things like that. So.
Did you have some kind of like vitamin thing you put in there, vitamins, or that was included?
That was built into the pellet.
Right. So they got everything they needed.
They got everything they needed. And then they ate that. But one point about what they were eating, and the fact that they did eat acorns, or they did eat whatever I was feeding them, and vegetable scraps, like they would eat the leaves of the sweet potatoes and things like that. The corn, corn stalks, if we had access to them, is the flavor of the meat comes from what you're feeding the animals. So if you're finishing your animals on ginger greens, and acorns and pecan shells, no waste. No. Yeah, everything was a cycle. So
if you're finishing them, what is the end of that sentence? If you're finishing them on ginger greens and acorns?
Well, it impacts the flavor. I never had it down to a science where I knew that if I finished them on certain kind of pasture, the meat would taste a certain way. But there are people who farm their grass-fed cattle or their grass-fed pork for, the last month before we go to the processor, we're going to put them in this pasture because it has this kind of forage. There are people that do that.
What exactly got you interested in this breed?
Well,
Or
it
did it just happen?
depends on how much time you got. Well, this particular breed, it was that lady that came and was talking about them, and then the fact that I thought that I couldn't have a hog on the farm because with only 8 fenced acres and I already had sheep, I just didn't have room for a big hog. So I wanted a homestead hog. I wanted a small, friendly hog and a boar that I could count on that would do what he was told. And I didn't want to be in there tussling with hogs. That's why I started with rabbits. They're in a cage. I can hold them, So, although I do have a few scars to show
Don't
show
we
for
all?
that, but I guess I was really thinking you were going to ask why we ended up farming in the first
Yeah,
place.
and yes, I would like to know
So,
that too.
so Lynn and Kurt and I are in a group that likes to focus on traditional eating real food, and buying from local farmers. And I met Lynn at a conference, and she was selling these little cassette tapes with lectures. And one of them said that you should buy most of your food from local farmers that you have a personal connection with it. And I went home to John and said, yeah, right. Okay, we're living in the suburbs of Atlanta, and how are we going to be having personal connections with farmers? This guy is crazy. And within 6 months, we were buying at least half of our food from local farmers and making these connections. So it was just planting that idea in our head. And then we started joining, you know, like Georgia Organics and doing farm tours and farm to dinner events. And we ended up at a farm to dinner event in Elberton, Georgia. And said, wouldn't it be nice to live like this? And, you know, my son was married, his daughter was married, his son was married, everybody's, you know, gone. And it's like, what's stopping us? So 11 weeks later, we were farming in Elberton.
Living your dream. You have
Yes.
to step out and
Yes, and so it wasn't anything we really planned for, but I've always loved mammals, I've always loved animals.
So you had already started turning your suburban house into a little homestead. So you were working your way.
I guess I was.
You
We
a
had
radio show.
yeah, we started a little podcast and telling other people how to buy local farms. And yeah, so anyway, we did that for 8 years, and then my son moved back to Athens, and Charlotte and her brother were born, and we came back to Athens, and I got to write the book. I'd been doing the research for 5 years, so I've done many interviews, collecting stories like the one you heard. Yeah, Matt?
Wasn't there something really specific in your childhood that got you interested in animals and genetics stuff?
There were lots of things. I remember when I was in second grade that the family cat got pregnant, and my cat was the daddy. And, you know, I remember my mother putting my hand on her belly and saying, look, she's having a contraction, you know, and then watching the kittens being born and you know, go to the teats. And so that kind of, and then I have brothers. I was a tomboy. We had reptiles and mammals and squirrels and raccoons.
everything.
Pardon?
Wasn't there an author that inspired you?
An author that inspired, there were so many authors. You want to prompt me?
Oh, okay. Well, you always told me it was James Herriot that made you want to be.
Well,
farmer.
I
You read
was,
lots of James Herriot books to show.
yeah, I started reading James Herriot, much later. So but that was one of them, James Herriot. And then, there, you know, Bambi, Felix Salten. There were lots and lots of them. But that's a good thing to point out while we're in the bookstore. I hope that you will peruse some of the titles here, because there's some great books, and they sell at discount prices here. And I'm sure you'll find plenty of animal books. I see several of this looks like the animal children's book, and it's got, can you believe that? Lynn, did you have a question or no? How about you?
I had a question. So coming to this as a novice, the way you presented, I thought that you worked in this and you had a lot of experience, but it sounds like you picked it up recently. So how did you prepare yourselves to start a farm?
To start a farm. Well, we had been doing a lot of farm visits and our farms tours, you know, just trying to find out where our food came from. And then I read a lot of books. I was a reading specialist, and I was I just like to do research, and I like to find out, and so when I didn't know anything about this breed of hog, because nobody had ever written anything about it, I said I can't find a book to read on the guinea hogs, so I'm gonna have to write it first. I finally just got to read it last month, you know, so this is a brand new baby book. But it was fun to read it from cover to cover because, you know, you have a bit here and a bit there, and you edit and you revise and you change, and then you finally get to read the book. So now I hope lots of people have the opportunity to read the book. Yes?
But to help this lady see her way into farming, on-the-job training, and just the farm visits and reading a book, and then doing.
Yes. So I started off just with a few chickens and then some rabbits, and I did the rabbits for a while, and then we'd add sheep, and our motto was to start small and learn and then revise. So we were always starting something new. Pam saw it. We went up there, it was just a field. And then we had to have fences. Then we had to have our farm dogs and water. And then we had to have gates. And we had to just learn everything. So, but we did it.
But anyone can start with chickens.
Sure. Chickens are the gateway livestock.
Well, it's very useful too on a farm. We noticed the bug population on that farm dropped.
Oh, yeah.
Probably after 2 years. It was nowhere near as uncomfortable being outside and getting eaten after we had the chickens, because they did a great job.
Yeah, and inside the fence, we didn't have to worry as much about ticks. But if you just stepped a few feet outside the perimeter fence onto our creek property, we could get covered because there was nothing there that was eating the ticks. It is amazing.
Observation, I think, is important too. You know, Cathy was a good observer. I mean, when something goes wrong, you just sit there and you look at the situation and say, okay, why did that animal do that? You know, and what can we do to change that behavior? And then we did a lot of safety things that were important to us. One of our first rules was we didn't want anything on the farm large enough, mean enough to kill us or hurt us. So, no cows.
Yeah, and we didn't have anything with horns either. Yeah. I mean, we were 55 and 57 when we started, so we had to keep it pretty...
Those gates we designed were because, you know, we're well over 50. And we don't want to be stepping over fences because it just takes that one time where you're stepping over that fence and the wood catches and you fall.
Yeah, and for those of you who don't know, there are portable electric fences that may be 2 to 3 feet tall, and a lot of farmers will just step over. But can you imagine catching your foot on an electric fence and then tearing it down and animals getting loose? So we controlled everything pretty well. So.
And chickens will pretty much eat anything?
Yeah, chickens will eat just about everything. And they also like to scrape through the compost pile and dig for insects, so they will help you with the composting. Do you have chickens, Jenny?
We do, but we have to keep them. They help too much.
Yes.
We need to,
That could be a problem.
yeah.
Yeah, when you're growing baby plants. How about you? Did you have a question in the back? No? Do you have another one? All right. Well, this would be a great time to buy a book if you're interested in reading it, and I will be happy to autograph books. And I want to thank you so much for being here and taking time out of your Sunday to learn about International Heritage Breeds Week and heritage animals. It's a very important topic, and it's not talked about nearly often enough.
That was awesome.
Thank you.
You've done so much research and
Thank you.